What's going on, everybody? Back with a new video. We are talking about production. We're talking about, making things fit together as far as arrangement and how production makes a huge impact on your mix. I feel like this is definitely something that's been talked about before, obviously, but not enough. Everything is like so focused on actual plugins, everything's recorded well, what kind of microphones you use for certain things, stuff like that, which is all obviously very important. But this is one of those things, just like if you were recording, I don't know, something on a $10,000 microphone or whatever. At the end of the day, if the signal itself, or like let's say it's a singer, guitar player, whatever the case is, if they're bad, they're still going to sound bad even though it's a $10,000 microphone. So I think with production, it's kind of like a similar thing where you can have the nicest studio, the nicest songwriters, the best written song in the world, whatever the case is, the best mixer. But if the production and the arrangement isn't there, then all that stuff doesn't matter because the mix isn't going to come together. You can probably get it to come together, but it's going to be very difficult. So I don't know. I just feel like this is kind of thinking a little bit different than let's just not talk about plugins or recording. Let's just talk about actual production arrangement. And I feel like I have a pretty good example. And the reason that I decided to make this video is because I was mixing a song a couple days ago that someone sent me. And I was like, let me get a good balance. No plugins, whatever, which is usually what I try to do anyway. But this literally had a little bit of everything. I was mixing guitars, some keys, Wurlitzer, Rhodes. There was an organ in there. There was some strings, like everything, literally like every single kind of instrument element was in there. And also, like, when I was listening to it, I was like, damn, the production was done very well. Like, it already sounds pretty good as is. But anyways, so I was just like, man, this would be a great video to make. And I was also working on this beat, which I'll play in a second. And I was like, let me just take the opportunity because, if I'm gonna sit here and like critique stuff and whatever, I was like, let me make sure that I'm following my own following my own advice and my own rules. And that is something that I try to do. So like I've been saying in the past couple of videos, I've been producing a lot more, and I was like, there we go, this is a little banger right here. So I thought it would be a good session to show like how important making sure that all your instruments and elements fit together and make sense. And I can show you why potentially you might not need to mix as hard, or you might not need to mix as much, or whatever the case is. Just making sure that you're adding the right instruments to fill certain sonic parts of the song, just so you don't feel that it's necessary to over EQ something to make it fit, over compress something to make it fit, making stuff with depth, which is another thing that I want to kind of show you too, is like how to get depth in a production without using reverbs, using modulation stuff like phasers, whatever the case is, or any kind of like mix trick like that. Just good old production, making sure that the foundation is good, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So yeah, let me play it real quick. I'm gonna play like the end of the verse going into, I guess, the pre-chorus, whatever this would be. I guess I labeled it like pre. So yeah, let me just go ahead and play it, and then you'll see what I'm talking about. So as you can hear, I would say it's a pretty solid production, at least for me. At least I think it is. I'm not saying I'm the greatest producer or whatever, but I was like, I really enjoyed making this one, and it was coming together, and just keeping in mind, like, okay, let me make sure I don't overproduce, because I do agree, and I also disagree with the term or the saying, like, overproduce and then you can take stuff away, versus like underproducing. You know what I'm saying? Like, might as well just go for it, which I do agree with. But at the same time, I think you also just need to know your limits, so you're not just wasting your own time, wasting, if you're in the room with the client, you don't want to waste other people's time either. But I do think that that's another skill. It's just trying to learn and, when to stop yourself from doing too much, and just knowing like, okay, I don't know if I need this extra snare or whatever the case is. Just to show you that if you add and make the appropriate layers to a track, you can see my arrangement too, because you can see, starts off with the drums and, whatever this bass guitar is. Then you can see that I'm adding each element. So it's like a visual thing too. And I'm not saying you should definitely, arrange a song by visuals, but I'm just saying like knowing when an arrangement is at least on, I would say, on the good side. Hopefully you can see that, and you can also hear that each part has layers being added and you take away and stuff like that, instead of just trying to have everything going at once. Because if you're experienced and you produce, obviously that's going to make sense to you. But there are people that are just starting off, or like productions that I get where they're just like literally they only drop like the snare, or they only drop, I don't know, a piano or something. It's like if you just drop a little bit more and then bring it back in the song later, that can make certain parts like more impactful and stuff. So let me go ahead and solo up the drums, and then we'll just start there. All right, and let me add the toms too, just when we get to the second part, right? So not doing too much, but it's just little texture things, you know what I'm saying? So it's like the toms are just adding this little extra thing to be like, oh, there's a different part coming. And then also on top of that, let's bring in the hi-hats. So now when we bring in this hi-hat, kind of bob in your head a little bit. And then you have this one that can make, this is coming in the pre-chorus and the chorus, so it's making it a little bit more exciting. Like, okay, cool, something important's happening here. And then you have these little ear candies, which will be these overheads, or not overheads, they'll be open hi-hat. And then we'll bring in the crash. So why this is important is, with me just soloing the percussion and soloing the drums, you already have like this little groove going. So it's not like just adding your best drums, trying to make the best bass line or whatever. It's just like making sure that your drums are like, if you can solo your drums and like you already have like a groove going, then I feel like, knowing that like, okay, cool, I'm bobbing my head, foot's tapping, whatever the case is. If you're in there with the artist or the clients, you can see they're already bobbing their head, then you already know that maybe you can move on for a little bit and then come back and add these little ear candy pieces. And not saying that I did this in one go. This is something that I was doing throughout the track, but the kick and the snare and the toms were definitely something, and the hi-hats were definitely like a good starting point. So I remember the next thing I played was this Moog, so it was this bass line. This is like the start of the song basically. So I was like, okay, cool, got my drums grooving. Now let's try to find like a easy, catchy bass line, and also knowing that this Moog is gonna be the actual bottom end of my song. So whether that's the actual bass itself, the sub frequencies, depending on the track. I just know that it needs to be simple, it needs to be high quality, and I just need to make sure that I don't overcompress it, over EQ. I just need to let it do its thing, but I do know that this is going to live at the bottom frequency range of my track. So let me play that. So boom, we have our drums, which is going to be like our rhythm, our groove. It's going to get the feet tapping, get the head bobbing, whatever the case is. And then now we need something to kind of, I always like to think like bass, depending on the track too. Like I said, I'm going to keep saying that, but depending on the track, for this, I was just like, I need something to kind of slow it down in a way. So I was like, let me do some like sustained notes when it comes to bass, instead of playing some like funky, groovy bass line. Let me just play something, sustained, hold the notes or whatever, kind of slow the track down a little bit, kind of ground it. But like I said, I'm also keeping in mind that this is going to be the bottom end of the frequency of, my track. So hopefully that makes sense. And then the next thing I was like, you know what? I need some like rhythm. I also do want it to be, this is kind of, I found this by accident and it worked. And I'll show you why it worked. I found this bass line, and let me just play without the actual EQ and distortion that I added. So let me go ahead and do this too. So it's a little low because of the amp that I added. So this is like, you know, so you can hear that it's similar to the drums. It's groovy, it's bouncy, whatever, but we already have a bass, you know, element in the track. So how is this going to interact with the Moog? So instead I'm like, man, I really like the groove, but it would be nice to have this play with the Moog as if, you know, just getting them to work together. Like, hey, I'm going to take care of the bottom end and you're going to take care of the groovy rhythm part. So instead, what I did, instead of trying to make these two work with balance, let me just go ahead and EQ. So what I did is I took out everything under 250. So now we have this. Super filtered. And then I was like, I need some gain. Obviously, this was probably done like as I was doing everything quickly. So maybe my fader could have been up a way louder when I was trying to, you know, compare what the difference would be. So you can see I'm at -13, which is pretty low. But I was like, I need something to kind of stick out. And now at this point, I'm like, it needs to work with the Moog. So let me distort it, do some effects, change the frequency range of this actual bass sample itself. So we started with some regular old bass guitar, but now we don't need the bass guitar for the bottom end. Like I said, we need it for the rhythm, but we also already have our bottom end covered with the Moog. So how can I get these, you know, these two elements to work together? So this is what I did. You know, just with those two together, you're already kind of bobbing your head. At least I am. You know, you're kind of already bobbing your head. So it's like now you have this other extra thing besides the drums and the percussion that you're bobbing your head to. You know, it's not gelling together yet because we haven't fully mixed the track, but we are getting the idea of like, hey, this is where you're going to live and this is where you're going to live. So now we got this. So that's what we made. So now we have our bass. We have our actual bottom end sub from the Moog. We have our drums, we have our percussion, and then we have this what used to be a bass guitar that was supposed to play, you know, the bass of a track. We've turned it into like this kind of rhythm guitar instead that's also working with the Moog. So now we have like this new bass element that we created. So it's kind of just like you just got to figure out how to make things work together. And with doing this, with sculpting things together, can be super helpful before you even start the mixing stage. So it's like, you know, arrangement can be super important instead of just being like, well, I hope this works for this, you know, part of the track. I hope this works for this frequency range of the track. It's just like take a little bit of time to like make sure that you're, you know, you're covering your ground. Just so if you do send this off to mixing, or if you're going to mix it yourself, you won't have such a hard time trying to fulfill the different frequency, you know, spectrum of a song. I don't know if that makes sense. It's just something that I notice when I'm mixing, especially when it's like a newer producer or people just making tracks and stuff. I just notice a lot that it's just that they're not filling the frequency spectrum they should be of a track. Not necessarily that maybe you should be doing it, but it is very helpful and it can make a song sound like a song. And that's why good songs sound the way they do, is because they're making sure that they're covering their ground when it comes to that. So I think the next thing I did, I'm going to skip around a little bit. I think I added this arpeggiator. So this Juno keyboard is what I added next. So we have this arpeggiator. I like arpeggiators a lot. I like Jack Antonoff a lot, and he always has arpeggiators in, I would say, like 99% of his production. So once I discovered him, I was like, oh, he likes arpeggiators too, and he uses them in a cool way. So, but I like arpeggiators. I think if you don't know how to play any sort of like string instrument like guitars or something, and you need to fill that spectrum of your song with like some sort of like mid-range kind of element, like what a guitar would fulfill typically, I like using arpeggiators. And with this, I am trying to do that. I'm trying to mimic some sort of guitar with using this keyboard. but also you can hear that it's like super spread out. So this is where we're getting our width of the track. This is where I like to think that we're getting our depth, and this is just using a production element and what kind of instrument we're using to fulfill that. So that's the way I like to think about it when I'm building tracks, is like, what can I do? What kind of instrument can I play to kind of get that depth before I start adding EQ and thinking about mixing or adding any reverb or something like that. So yeah, like I said, it's like, sure, it is obviously playing more notes, playing more chords, whatever you want to call it. It is a way, as far as like a production thing goes, that we're trying to get more with depth out of our tracks, just taking the sonics and pushing them out to the sides and putting ourselves in a different headspace when it comes to that. I do remember I played this next. So these are be like our chords. So clearly the same thing. It's playing exactly what the arpeggiator is playing. The only difference is that it's supporting the arpeggiator. And I guess that's a word I should have used earlier, is that it's just all about supporting elements and supporting the next thing that's being layered, which I think that's why layering is still important. I think a lot of production has gotten away from layering. It's been like more stripped back, which is totally fine. But I do think if you're going to layer, just make sure that whatever you're layering with is just supporting it and not trying to make it sound bigger, make it sound more full, whatever the case is. Like, you just want to make sure that it makes sense and you're supporting it. So play it one more time. Because we don't have to worry about mixing yet, as we're producing, or as you're producing, like, you just want to make sure that, like I said, you're giving yourself, or you're giving the mix engineer or the artist the frequency room that they need, because we have our low end covered, we have our groove covered with the drums, percussion. We can even say that's gonna cover some of the high end of the track, and then we have kind of like our mid range taken care of with that bass guitar, and then this arpeggiator is taking care of some of that mid-range, but also the depth like we just talked about. And then the chords are supporting the arpeggiator, which they're kind of playing in the same frequency range, so some of that mid-range. So it's just like taking care of your frequencies while you're building a track. I don't know. That's just like how I break down tracks when I listen to really good songs, or just the way that I think I've learned just watching other producers and stuff make tracks or whatever. And then the next thing I played was this, because we need some sort of little catchy, funky melody. I don't even know I'm going to keep this. I think it's a little too cheesy, but just for the sake of the video, I'm going to keep it in there. And I don't hate it too much yet, but I do think it's a little bit cheesy. Now we need like this part that's going to be like, okay, this is the chorus now. Maybe this is the melody that you're going to remember when you listen back to the song, whatever the case is. Like, is having some sort of melody or element that's going to make you remember that track. Like, oh yeah, I do remember this track because of this little funky bell, whatever the case is. Also, knowing that we need to make a melody, this is also covering the super top end of our frequency range as well. So when I play it, you'll hear. So yeah, a little cheesy, a little Christmassy, I guess. At least we know that we have our super top end covered of the track now, and it's not taking up too much room because we still got vocals to think about and stuff. And yeah, so that's another thing too, is that we don't have any vocals on it yet. This is just pure production. So we also need to keep in mind, like, hey, we don't need to produce too much just because we think it sounds cool or we like the actual sound itself. You also got to remember that for the most part, there's always going to be vocals added to it. The next thing I'm going to bring in this guitar, because I was just like, I need it to sound a little bit more. I need something to come in, which this part of the track will make sense later, but I'll play it in the chorus. So I found this like little guitar sample. So in the chorus, it's super subtle. I'll play in the first verse and you'll hear it a little bit more prominent. But if you can't hear it, it's supporting the arpeggiator and the chords. Not only is it supporting them, but I also just wanted some sort of like live instrument. I do think there is something cool about mixing digital stuff with live instruments. So the guitar is playing the same chords as the actual Juno and the arpeggiator. And you're the one thing that I do like about it is that you're hearing those strums. And I just think there is something about adding some sort of strum element to chords that are just played like straight on the one. You know what I mean? So it's like this is probably playing a little bit before the one. You know what I'm saying? Just like coming in, and I don't know, like almost, yeah, I don't know. It's just like a strum. Like that's the only way I can explain it. I just think that it adds some sort of like realism, I guess, to the chords, and not just playing something that's just so perfect or whatever. Which is also another little side note is that I try my best not to mess with the velocity and stuff when I play stuff, or any of the quantization or whatever. Kind of try to just leave it as is, because I think that's super important too. And then this last thing, the last element, I added this OPX arpeggiator. So this last arpeggiator, I think for me, I was just looking for something to give the artist or the listener, kind of take them on a ride. Like, so if I do this, so it's similar to the original Juno arpeggiator we're playing, but like I was saying earlier, the main difference, or what you can hear the difference, is obviously they're playing different rhythms, but the OPX is taking up more of that higher frequency range, and the Juno is just playing more of like that low mid range. So it's just like, taking care of our spectrum across a track, which is what I liked about it. And then, like I said, it sounds a little bit more like epic sounding, so I think it sounded good with the chorus. It's kind of just like making it more exciting when it comes in. And also, it's adding way more stereo width than that Juno is. It's just even more immersed in the track, at least the way that I like to think about it. So hopefully that makes sense. Hopefully I'm making sense so far. It's kind of weird because I don't really make production videos like that or like this on my channel, but I'm producing way more, and I feel a little bit more confident and stuff. So let me play the intro going into the chorus, or into the verse, and then maybe these elements will start to make a little bit more sense. So the intro is super important. Just starting off with that bass guitar, the filtered, simple hi-hat, kick and snare, and then we have our toms coming up. That's gonna be like, all right, here goes the verse. And now you can hear the guitar. And then drop all the drums. Like, okay, cool, pre-chorus is coming. Hopefully this is making sense, and hopefully you can see and you can hear visually like why arranging elements is super important, because it just makes the pre-chorus sound a little bit more exciting, and then when it gets into the chorus, it's going to sound even more exciting. So, and then boom, now we're in chorus. And then verse 2. Then it repeats again. And then last thing I'll talk about, which I think is cool, and instead of, usually you want to write a slightly different part for the bridge, but I'm not a songwriter or an artist, so I just had to do it with the production elements that I had, and I kind of already liked what I had, so this is kind of like a quick way you can make like a little bridge with using the stuff that you have. So, I don't know. I always like to think, especially these days, bridges are like verse three because we don't really do, three verses anymore. So I just try to keep it like in that realm or that, the ballpark of a verse or whatever. But a lot of popular producers will like do a key change or play something completely different. But sometimes if you keep it simple and let the artist do their thing, you can come back and maybe write something else. But for the most part, in my experience, just doing and working with what you have is a good starting point. So this is the first time I've done like a production video like this. So hopefully it was educational and it makes sense or whatever. I'll try my best to like edit this in a way where it'll make sense and stuff like that. But if you watched this far, I appreciate it. Like, share, subscribe. Use my links. Buy some plugins. Buy some software. Buy some SonarWorks. And use my Z Sound links if you have any studios out there and you guys want to buy some new speakers, headphones, microphones, cables, whatever the case is. It would help me out a lot. And otherwise, I'll see you on the next one. Peace.